Bill, Kristol, pick up on the point about Republicans speaking out. I think a lot of people were surprised that we heard from Senator Lindsey Graham so early in the process, and he was specifically focused on Michelle Childs, of course, of South Carolina, not surprisingly. Now, the White House has said, look, we're not going to be influenced by anyone lobbying for one potential candidate or another, but how important is bipartisan support, and do you expect a number of Republicans to get on board?
Yeah, I do. I think the Republicans are split. I like the way we were talking about nervous Democrats. Didn't Dick Durbin even use the word himself? I'm anxious. It's kind of, what is that called when you repeat yourself, you know, tautology or something, like nervous Democrats. They should be going on the offensive, and I agree with Doug on this, incidentally. They can not just appeal to progressives and to, obviously, to black voters, that's fine. There are a lot of moderates who are pleased at the notion of more diversity on the court, who will look briefly at these candidates' resumes and say they look very much like the resumes of, you know, Amy Coney Barrett or Kavanaugh or whatever, you know, distinguished clerkships. They're judges on various, you know, the D.C. Circuit or on a state court, or in the case of Judge Kruger, the California Supreme Court, very well regarded by their peers, have in the past been endorsed by people who aren't on the left as good judges. And I think Biden should exploit this. I mean, I think he should be, you know, I think the Democrats, frankly, should really make an issue of this. They should highlight the supporters they get. Call out the Roger Wickers of the world who are saying, well, this candidate isn't going to be up to the standards of, you know, the Republican candidates or maybe other Democratic candidates. Make Republicans split. Yeah. Let Trump weigh in. Let Trump attack Mitt Romney. Does
that backfire? Those comments by Roger Wicker, Ted Cruz?
Totally. I mean, they'll backfire if the Biden administration and if Democrats do a little bit to help make them backfire.
Well, I think we are.
I hope you guys are ready to do this.
I think you're going to see, look, you're seeing groups mobilizing in support of whoever the nominee is. So I think you are going to see that. And look, this is a legacy pick for Biden, right? This is one of those historic picks that he's going to be remembered for way down the road, right? And the people who are opposing whoever this may be, they'll also be in the history books, too.
But let the suburban voters, for example, outside Atlanta, to take a state, right? Let them hear about Roger Wicker, and let's see who are the Republican Senate candidates down there. Herschel Walker. Let's see what he says. And if he's sort of dismissive of these people, left-wing, progressives, unqualified, really? Yeah. I mean, I think it's an opportunity in some of these big states for Democrats to really not just to appeal to the base, but to appeal to moderate swing voters.
And you've already seen the White House do this. When Senator Wicker made those comments, they came out very quickly. They had all the research, and they have it on all the senators and the candidates, and they are prepared to move very fast if there are moments like that throughout this process. But one of the things that they also are signaling to Republicans for support, you heard it from the president himself, is saying, I'm not looking for an ideologue. And that's a signal to say that this is not going to be somebody who you can't get behind.
One of the other interesting components that has crept into this debate is what the background should look like, not just ideologically, but in terms of the person's education. And there's been some criticism, including from James Clyburn, that there are too many people on the court with Ivy League degrees. Carol, could this actually bolster someone like Judge Michelle Childs, who is not educated in the Ivy League?
Potentially, sure. And one of the things you know about Joe Biden, because you've covered him for a while, is that the president can be somewhat critical, or at least note that people are Ivy League and think they're smarter than others, potentially. And so it's obviously something that he thinks about. That he's not an Ivy Leaguer himself. I'm not either. And so this is something that when you're talking about diversity, it's also background and where people come from, just in terms of what their education experience is like. And so I think it's very much in the conversation.
Doug, we can't ignore the fact that this is coming against the backdrop of a very difficult moment for the president. He's dealing with the crisis in Ukraine. Yesterday, we found out that inflation is at a 40-year high. Yes, jobs are up, but the inflationary figures continue to dog this president as he heads toward his State of the Union address. What does the administration need to do in order, in putting aside the Supreme Court pick, but in order to turn the page on this very difficult moment for the economy and still in the fight against COVID?
I think there's some opportunities here for Biden and for Democrats in particular, because, look, yes, we're in a tough moment, and it's been a tough few months, but the COVID numbers are dropping. You know, I think that's something that the administration should take credit for. He does have the State of the Union coming up in March to tell the story, and ultimately what Democrats need to do is have a narrative, right? And you've got multiple different stories out there by Democrats about what's going on. People need to understand why inflation is where it is, right? The Republicans are saying it's Biden's fault. Well, we need to have a counter to that, whether that is corporate profits that are corporations who are raising prices, whether that's China, whatever it may be, there needs to be a unified response to that. And we need some wins, and I think the Supreme Court pick is a big win.
President Biden responded to a question from Lester about inflation yesterday. I want to play that and get reaction on the other side.
I think it was back in July you said inflation was going to be temporary. I think a lot of Americans are wondering what your definition of temporary is.
Well, you're being a wise guy with me a little bit, and I understand that's your job. But look, at the time, what happened was let's look at the reason for the inflation. The reason for the inflation is the supply chains were cut off.
When can Americans expect some relief from this soaring inflation?
According to Nobel laureates, 14 of them that contacted me, and a number of corporate leaders, it's ought to be able to start to taper off as we go through this year. In the meantime, I'm going to do everything in my power to deal with the big points that are impacting most people in their homes.
Bill Kristol, the president says that this inflation is going to taper off. You have seen the impacts of inflation on presidencies. If it doesn't, how much trouble is he in, but more broadly, are Democrats in the midterms?
I mean, they're in some trouble, but you got to make other arguments, which is unemployment and the growth in the economy in general. And look, 1 year ago, right about now, the House of Representatives was debating the American Rescue Plan that passed next month in March in the Senate. People are getting big refunds. If you have little kids, if you're middle class, working class, even upper middle class, you're getting big refunds from that child tax credit. Does Biden, incidentally, does anyone know that? No. Does anyone know that that bill was passed by a party-line vote in both the House and the Senate?
It's messaging, you're saying. It's a failure of messaging.
Biden never talks about it. That question, he should have said one sentence. I'm very worried about inflation. We're working very hard on it. But you know what? I'm really pleased that so many Americans are getting several $1,000s more in tax rebates than they would have gotten a year ago. And that bill, I'm sorry to say, was passed only with Democratic votes. I mean, they're just very bad, if I could say. Can you work on this? Well, very bad at pivoting and messaging.
Former President Obama was on Capitol Hill yesterday, essentially saying we need to do better at messaging. We have a good story to tell. We need to do a better job at telling it.
Yeah, kids in school, 99% of kids are in school. Small businesses are open. You've got people at work, unemployment at 4, below 4. You know, we're getting shots in people's arms. GDP is at 5, historic. That's better with growth than China. That's a great story to tell. Now you have to balance that with the anxiety that people feel. But if we don't tell it, then no one else will.
Carol, you covered former President Obama. The significance and the timing of the fact that he spoke to Democrats yesterday to say, hey, we got to get it together.
Yeah, and you see him crop up when they're at significant moments. We saw it with voting rights. Now we're seeing it at this moment where the message is not just, hey, we need to tell our story. And what's interesting about that is that President Obama criticized himself, and even President Biden has said he was critical of it at the time for not telling the story, not taking a victory lap, as he put it, for the things that he did while in office. And now President Biden is experiencing that. We've heard for weeks, though, that they know the problem, so they've diagnosed it. We have a messaging problem, but we haven't really seen a full-fledged fix yet. And what's interesting about bringing in President Obama to talk to Democrats is that seems to be part of it, and they probably have a little bit more time to get there, but not much.
All right. Fantastic panel. So great to have you all in person. Bill, Carol, Doug. Stick around because we're going to have more questions for you later in the show. And be sure to tune in to the president's full interview with my colleague Lester Holt. That's this Sunday, airing before the Super Bowl, and it's only on NBC.
I won this seat back for Republicans in 2020. And if you want a Republican majority, to thwart the radical far-left DC Democrat agenda, then we've got to keep the seat in Republican hands. We've got to get a majority back. If you want to lose this seat once again in midterm election cycle to Democrats, then my opponent is more than qualified to do just that.
Welcome back. Back with me now, Carol Lee, Bill Kristol, and Doug Thornell. That video, Bill Kristol, kind of talks about the challenge for some Republicans. Here you have Nancy Mace. She is trying to hold on to her seat, walking a very fine line with former President Donald Trump. He's endorsed her opponent, and there she is in front of Trump Tower.
Yeah, I think he endorsed her opponent the day or two before, right? And
yes.
The first reaction to that was not to say, he should stay out of our business, we'll take care of our own work in South Carolina, or to maybe criticize, God forbid, Donald Trump. It was to fly up to New York City and stand at 50, whatever that is, 56th, I guess, outside of Trump Tower. And I mean, really? And it does say it all, right? It's
says it
so
all.
pathetic.
Carol?
Does this work? I mean, does voters want like authenticity? I mean, she's just been kind of all over the map when it comes to Trump and where she stands. And then to do this, it's just, I don't know.
Let me read you guys what former President Trump said in endorsing her opponent, Katie Arrington. He says, Katie Arrington is running against an absolutely terrible candidate, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, whose remarks and attitude have been devastating for her community and not at all representative of the Republican Party, to which she has been very disloyal. Bill, one of the things that I find interesting about this is that it underscores why you have Kevin McCarthy essentially embracing Trump and saying we need him in order to hold on to the House.
Yeah, and I think the thing he has against Nancy Mace, who did not end up voting, for example, for impeachment, though she said a couple of critical things on January 7th, is she got in this big fight with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Remember that? And that obviously got her Marjorie Taylor Greene whipped up, which got Trump whipped up. And it does feel to me like we were talking about this, and you should now talk about this on the air. We were talking about it off the air. The Democrats could do a better job of wrapping the extremism of some of the House Republicans and Trump himself around the whole conference, right? I mean, even the sort of decent Republicans turn out to have to fly up to New York and you know, sort of bow before the former president.
And this is the conundrum that Democrats are facing, Doug, because again, going back to former President Obama's meeting with them, he wants them to be looking towards the future and to be messaging. But here you have these moments, these potential places where they can capitalize and remind folks about former President Trump and the fact that for a lot of a large swath of the Democratic base, certainly he is a unifying lightning rod.
And it's not just Trump. Remember, the RNC passed a resolution a week ago, which basically said that January 6th was legitimate political discourse. So right then and there, you know, Democrats, I think they've been somewhat effective here, force Republicans to condemn that. Or do they embrace that? Do they think what happened on January 6th when you had multiple people die, police officers die, do they think that was legitimate political discourse?
Nancy Pelosi spoke out about it. You don't think she's
what they do is they run away from reporters in the Capitol. Right?
Yeah, Republicans run away. Democrats, I think Democrats are prosecuting, and they could be tougher on it. But yeah, look, like, make them own this. It's surprising to me that a lot of these Republicans who talk really tough just roll over for Trump and are just such cowards.
Carol.
Well, we've seen this time and again, right? Somebody gets out there, a Republican gets out there for the former president. He criticizes them, they capitulate. I mean, it just keeps happening, and it just underscores something that we talk about all the time, which is former President Trump has a really strong grip on the party, and you can't get through a primary if you're a Republican most anywhere without his support, particularly if he's calling you a terrible candidate. It's one thing for him to just not support you, but then he went on to say that she was a terrible candidate and on and on.
No, you're absolutely right. And even as we watch these divides within the Republican Party, there are obviously significant divides with the Democratic Party as well. Sort of highlighted by the race, Texas 28, Henry Cuellar's district. He's trying to hold on to his seat. Of course, he's had the challenge of the FBI raiding his home. He's not been faced with any charges yet, but certainly has raised scrutiny of him as a candidate. And he's running against someone who has been endorsed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jessica Cisneros, who just ran this very tough ad saying that Henry Cuellar has been in Washington too long. Is that something that's going to resonate in this cycle, Doug, do you think?
I mean, look, I don't think there's going to be a ton of these types of primaries on the Democratic side. I'm actually looking at the Republican side, and you look at states like Arizona, if you look at states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, you know, they are going to see some really brutal primaries. We're already seeing it in a number of these places, Georgia as well. And so, look, this is a House district that, you know, that at the end of the day is not of huge concern to Democrats. But for Republicans, when you're looking at the Senate map and you really go state by state and you look at the places they need to win, there are some really competitive, ugly primaries taking place that really reveal Republicans to be super dysfunctional. And so that to me is what the story.
Carol, before we go, I want to ask you about this. Allegations from two Senate Democrats who claim that the CIA is secretly collecting bulk data pertaining to Americans. What do you make of this? Is this something that could backfire?
Well, look, it's something that obviously is worth taking a very serious look at. Unfortunately, much of their letter was redacted, so we don't know exactly what this is about, but it raises a lot of questions, and it's the kind of thing that the American public really doesn't like, in the sense that there's already this concern that people are too much in our business, that they're spying at us, that they're in our devices, and all of these things. We saw this with the Edward Snowden issue, with those leaks, and so this is something that the Biden administration is going to need to address.
Absolutely. All right. And comes against the backdrop of this very heated political midterm year. Thanks to all of you. Great conversation. You started us off. You wrapped us up. We appreciate it. Carol Lee, Bill Kristol, and Doug Thornell. Thanks to all of you.